Before you hear what I'm about to tell you, I need you to understand something. We spend our whole lives learning to recognize danger. We teach our kids to look both ways. We lock our doors at night. We check the rearview mirror. But nobody, not one person, ever sat me down and said, "Watch out for the ones who bring you pie." My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old, and I found out my nephew was trying to dismantle my life while I sat across from him at a folding table in a credit union conference room, watching him try to explain a stack of documents he never expected me to have. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Marcus kept talking, fast, reasonable sounding, the way he always talked. But I had stopped hearing the words. I was looking at his hands, the way they moved across the table, restless, adjusting papers that didn't need adjusting. The same hands that had carried a casserole dish through my front door 3 weeks earlier set it on my kitchen counter and said, "Just thought you could use a home-cooked meal, Uncle Gerald." I almost thanked him for what came next. Almost. To understand how I ended up in that room, you have to understand something about who I am and what I built. I spent 31 years working as a licensed electrician out of Columbus, Ohio. I know how systems work. I know that a problem in the wall doesn't announce itself with a sign. It hides inside the insulation, behind the drywall, right up until the moment it burns something down. That's what I kept thinking about later when all of it came apart. The fire was always there. I just hadn't smelled the smoke yet. I retired 2 years ago, February, on a Thursday, because that's the kind of man I am. Even my retirement was practical. No party, no cake. I shook hands with my foreman, Ray Piquet, who I'd worked alongside for 19 years, and I drove home to the house on Dunmore Street that I'd owned outright since 2019. 3 bedrooms, detached garage, a yard that stays green if you're willing to put in the work. I was willing. My wife, Connie, passed in 2021. Cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. After she was gone, the house got very quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Even though I'd spent 30 years working in buildings where the walls hummed and the pipes knocked, and the silence between sounds told you everything you needed to know. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind you can't fix with a socket wrench. My nephew Marcus started coming around more after Connie died. He's 34, Connie's sister's boy, grew up 2 towns over in Worthington. He'd always been charming in that way some people are. Easy smile, quick with a compliment, the kind of person who makes you feel like the most important man in the room. He called every week, stopped by on Sunday sometimes with his girlfriend Tamara, who laughed at everything and made sweet tea the way Connie used to. I won't lie, it felt good. After 2 years of quiet, it felt like a window finally cracked open. Last October, my 63rd birthday came on a Wednesday. I didn't expect much. My daughter Rochelle, who lives in Phoenix now, called in the morning. My buddy Clyde from the union took me to lunch at the diner on Broad Street and paid the check before I could argue. It was a good enough day. When I got home, there was a package on the porch. Brown box, neat handwriting. My name in blue marker. Inside was a home security camera. One of those small white ones, cylinder-shaped, that you plug into an outlet and point at the room. The note tucked underneath said, "For the house, peace of mind. Happy birthday, Marcus and Tamara." I set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a moment. Peace of mind. At the time, that's exactly what it sounded like. I plugged it in the next evening, in the living room, facing the front door. The manufacturer's app walked me through the setup in about 4 minutes. Motion detection, 2-way audio, cloud storage. Marcus texted that night to ask if I'd gotten it working. I told him yes, and he sent back a thumbs up and a little emoji of a house with a heart in it. I remember thinking, that boy has a good heart. I brought it up at my Thursday card game. Me, Clyde, Darnell, and Roosevelt. Same 4 men, same folding table in Clyde's basement, going on 11 years. Roosevelt asked what brand it was. I told him. He turned a card over, then looked up at me with the specific expression of a man who has seen too much to react quickly. "You set that up yourself?" he asked. I said I had. "Who has the login to the app?" I stopped. I had logged in through the email Marcus had pre-registered in the setup instructions. A sheet of paper tucked under the camera. For easy setup, it said. Account already created. I'd followed it without a second thought. The same way you follow a wiring diagram that's already been laid out for you. Roosevelt put his cards face down on the table. He didn't make a joke. Roosevelt worked 30 years in IT security for the state. He doesn't joke about certain things. Gerald, he said carefully, if someone else set up that account, someone else can see that camera's feed. The room got quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of men who know each other well. The other kind. I told him I was sure it was nothing. I laughed once, the way you do when the alternative is admitting that something important just shifted under you. Roosevelt didn't laugh back. I took the camera home that night and unplugged it before I even took my coat off. I set it on the kitchen table and stood there looking at it the way you look at a breaker panel after a short, trying to figure out which wire went wrong and when. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't say a word to anyone except Roosevelt, who told me the next morning to bring the camera to his house. He'd know what to check. He had it for 2 days. When he called me back, his voice was measured in a way that told me everything before he said anything. You need to come over, he said, and don't tell Marcus anything. The camera had been registered to an account with Marcus's email. Live feed access enabled. Motion alert sent directly to a secondary device. Two-way audio turned on by default, which meant that every conversation I'd had in my living room for the past 3 weeks had been potentially audible to whoever held that login. I sat in Roosevelt's kitchen while he walked me through it on his laptop, pointing at the settings the way a doctor points at something on an X-ray. Careful, steady, watching your face. He could hear you, Roosevelt said, anytime you were in range. I thought about what I'd said in my own living room over the past 3 weeks. A phone call with my financial planner about moving a portion of my retirement account. A conversation with Rochelle about whether I'd updated my will since Connie passed. A long out-loud monologue to nobody in particular about the roof estimate I'd gotten, $14,000, and whether it made more sense to sell than to repair. My mouth went dry in a way I hadn't felt since the morning the hospital called about Connie. Roosevelt told me to go to the police. The precinct on Morse Road was gray and fluorescent and smelled like bad vending machine coffee. The officer who took my initial statement was young, patient, and clearly uncertain whether what I was describing rose to anything. He wrote things down and told me someone would follow up. A detective named Okafor called me 2 days later. She was direct in the way competent people are direct without being unkind. She confirmed what Roosevelt had found and told me that while the camera itself wasn't illegal to own, the way the account had been configured and accessed without my knowledge created a different question. She asked me what I knew about my nephew's financial situation. I told her the truth. Not much. Marcus worked in sales, drove a nice car, talked often about deals he was close to closing. I hadn't thought to look deeper. When someone brings you sweet tea and checks on you every Sunday, you don't run a background check. Okafor told me to act normal. Don't confront. Don't mention the camera. She said those 2 words, act normal, like she'd said them 100 times to 100 people who had no idea how hard they were. Normal meant answering Marcus's Sunday texts. Normal meant letting him come over the following weekend with Tamara and the peach cobbler and sitting in the same living room where the camera had been, eating cobbler, listening to Marcus ask whether I'd thought about getting the gutters cleaned before winter set in, whether I'd talked to anyone about the roof situation, whether I'd ever considered that managing all of this alone was a lot for one person. I just worry about you, Uncle Gerald, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. You've got a lot on your plate. Tamara nodded sympathetically from the love seat. I said I was fine. I said I appreciated him. I passed him the cobbler and watched him settle back into the cushions like a man who believed he was right on schedule. After they left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The cobbler was good. That almost made it worse. I called Roosevelt that night. He told me to write everything down. Dates, conversations, exact words. He said people who are trying to take something from you count on time, making you fuzzy. Paper keeps you sharp. I started keeping a small notebook in the drawer by the stove. I wrote down every visit, every text, every question Marcus asked that pointed in the same direction. And they all pointed in the same direction. Always toward the house, toward my accounts, toward whether I was keeping up with things. The language was gentle, concerned, wrapped in the specific vocabulary of a man who wanted to sound like he was helping. 3 weeks in, I found the paperwork. It was a Saturday morning. I was looking for the original deed to the house. I'd been asked to produce it for a refinancing conversation I hadn't actually started. And I went through the filing box in the back of my bedroom closet, the one I hadn't opened since Connie organized it the year before she got sick. Behind the insurance folders, tucked flat against the cardboard back, was a manila envelope I didn't recognize. Inside were 2 documents printed on plain paper. The first was a template for a durable power of attorney. My name was typed in the relevant fields. Marcus's name was typed in others. The signature lines were blank. The second was a printout of a form for requesting a competency evaluation. Handwritten in the margin in Marcus's handwriting, I recognized the slant from birthday cards going back 20 years. Doctor appointment first. Get him to mention memory issues. Then this. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I am a man who spent 3 decades solving problems inside walls. I know what it looks like when someone has been planning a job for a while. The staging, the pre-work, the way the materials are laid out before the visible work even starts. This had been in my closet. In my house. Someone had been in my house. I called Okafor from the driveway, sitting in my truck with the engine off. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a breath that told me this was no longer a question of maybe. She told me to photograph every page and email it to her before I put it back. She told me to put it back. That was the hardest instruction I'd ever followed. I put it back. The next few weeks required a kind of discipline I hadn't needed since the year Connie was in treatment, when every day asked you to hold yourself together for someone else's sake, while everything in you wanted to break. I moved through the motions. I answered texts. I let Marcus come over and sit in my kitchen and talk about how the market was uncertain and how a lot of men my age were simplifying their assets, consolidating, making things easier to manage. I said, "That makes sense." I said, "I've been thinking about it." I watched his face do the small, careful thing it did when he thought he was making progress. At Roosevelt's suggestion, I started talking out loud in the living room about specific things, about how I'd been having trouble with my memory lately, about how the paperwork for the house felt overwhelming, about how it might be nice to have someone I trusted handle some of the administrative side of things. I hated every word. But 2 days after the first time I said it out loud in that living room, Marcus texted me, "Hey, I've been doing some reading. There are some simple legal tools that could take a lot of stress off you. Worth a conversation when you're ready." I showed the text to Okafor. She said, "Keep going." I did. The mistake came in week 4, and it came because I was tired. Not physically tired. Tired in that deeper way that happens when you've been pretending for too long, and the pretending starts to cost you something you can't get back. I called Marcus on a Tuesday night, and I said, too directly, that I'd found some papers in my closet that confused me, that I wanted to talk about them. There was a silence on the line that lasted 3 full seconds. Then Marcus said, calm and even, "I don't know what you mean, Uncle Gerald." I said I thought he might. He said I sounded tired. He said maybe I should get some rest. He said he'd come by Sunday. He didn't come by Sunday. He didn't text either. The silence lasted 8 days and felt like standing in a room where all the circuits have gone dead, and you can't tell yet if it's the panel or something worse. Then the email came. It was to me and Rochelle both. Subject line, family meeting. Uncle Gerald's well-being. Marcus had written 3 paragraphs. Concerned, careful paragraphs about his observations over the past year. About my apparent difficulty managing the house. About a few things I'd said. Things I recognized, things I had said out loud in my living room. About memory, about paperwork, about needing help. He suggested a family meeting with a mediator. He mentioned that he had spoken with someone familiar with estate planning who could help facilitate. He CC'd Tamara. He CC'd Connie's sister, his mother, Diane, who I had not spoken to in 2 years. I forwarded the email to Okafor before I read it a second time. She called me within the hour. Her tone had changed. Not warmer, exactly, but more precise. The way a person gets when the shape of something finally becomes clear enough to act on. "This is the move," she said. "He's trying to establish a record. Multiple family members, a meeting, a mediator he's already chosen. If you walk into that meeting unprepared, you walk out with your credibility in question." I asked her what we do. She said, "We set the table first." Okafor worked with the Financial Crimes Unit and the Credit Union, where I'd held my accounts for 22 years. They pulled the records. Marcus had called the credit union twice in the preceding 2 months. Once to ask about the process for adding a co-signer to an account for an elderly relative. Once to ask whether a power of attorney document would be sufficient to access the accounts of a member who was no longer able to manage them independently. He had used those words, "no longer able." The branch manager, a woman named Patricia Sims, who had known me since I opened the account in 2002, had flagged the second call internally. She knew my voice. She knew my signature. She had not told Marcus anything useful. She was sitting in the room when it mattered. The meeting was held at the credit union, not at the neutral location Marcus had proposed. Okafor had requested it. The room was small, with a rectangular table and chairs that didn't match, and a window that looked out on the parking lot. Marcus arrived in a sport coat, leather portfolio under his arm, the look of a man who believed he was walking into something he had already won. Tamara was with him. Diane came in behind them, looking uncertain, the way people look when they've been told a story and are only now wondering if it's the complete one. I was already seated when they came in. Roosevelt sat beside me. Okafor sat at the end of the table. Patricia Sims sat beside her. Marcus saw the room, and for just a moment, one moment, his face did something it couldn't help doing. Then it went smooth again. He smiled. "Uncle Gerald, I'm glad we're doing this." I said, "Me too." Patricia Sims introduced herself to Marcus professionally, as though they had never spoken. She placed 2 documents on the table in front of him. The call logs. The transcript of the second conversation, the one about the member who was no longer able. "Can you tell me the context for these calls?" she asked. Marcus looked at them, then at me, then at his portfolio, which he did not open. "I was exploring options, he said, on my uncle's behalf." Okafor placed the photographs of the documents on the table, the power of attorney template, the competency evaluation form, the handwritten note in the margin, Marcus's handwriting. Diane leaned forward and read the margin note and made a sound I won't describe because it was private and it didn't belong to me. "Marcus," Diane said. He looked at her, then away. Okafor spoke clearly and without drama. She described what the camera had been configured to do. She described the account access. She described the pattern of calls to the credit union, the documents found in my home, and the email to family members designed to build a record of incapacity. "None of these individual elements are necessarily conclusive," she said. "Together, they describe a pattern of elder financial abuse in the planning stage." Marcus straightened in his chair. "That's a serious accusation." "Yet," Okafor said, "it is." Tamara put her hands in her lap and looked at the table. She didn't look up for the rest of the meeting. Marcus tried 3 different angles. He said he was worried about me. He said I had seemed confused in recent months. He said the documents were just exploratory, that he'd been looking into options in case they were ever needed. He said I had misunderstood his intentions. I let him say all of it. Then I said, "Marcus, I wired this house myself in 2004. I pulled the permits, ran the conduit, and passed inspection on the first try. I paid it off in full. I buried my wife from it, and I will be in it when I'm 91. I paused. I know what a circuit looks like when someone's been in the wall. He looked at me for a long time, and for the first time in all of it, he looked like what he actually was. Not charming, not confident, not concerned, just young. Young and caught. Okafor asked him to stay. There were further questions. He stayed. Diane cried in the parking lot afterward. I stood with her for a few minutes and told her I didn't blame her. I meant it. She had been handed a story and told it was the truth. That happens to good people. I drove home alone. The afternoon light was flat and gray the way it gets in Columbus in November, the sky the color of unfinished drywall. I pulled into the garage and sat with the engine off and didn't move for a while. The house was quiet when I went inside, same quiet it had been since Connie. But this time, it was the honest kind. I changed every password I had that week. I met with my attorney and had the will and the power of attorney documents updated, real ones, witnessed and filed properly, with my daughter Rochelle listed exactly as I intended. I opened a new account at a different institution and had my direct deposit rerouted before the end of the month. Roosevelt helped me go through the filing box and understand everything that was in it. Some of it I'd never actually looked at. That embarrassed me, but I looked at it now. Marcus was not charged immediately. Okafor told me these cases move slowly when no money has actually been taken yet. I told her I understood. I had spent 30 years in buildings that could have burned down from things nobody noticed in time. Not burning down wasn't the same as being fine. I still think about the camera, the way I plugged it in myself, the way I followed the setup sheet without a second thought. Not because I was careless, I am not a careless man, but because it came from someone I trusted. And trust is its own kind of override. It bypasses the checks. It skips the inspection, and the people who understand that are precisely the people who know exactly where to aim. Rochelle called me 2 Sundays ago. We talked for almost an hour, which is more than we usually manage with the time difference. At the end of the call, she said, "Dad, I'm glad Roosevelt was there." I said, "Me too." Then I said, "Put me in your phone as someone you check on. Not because I need it, because we should all have somebody who notices." She laughed a little. She said she would. I hung up and stood in the kitchen, listening to the furnace run. I've always found furnaces reassuring. They do exactly what they're designed to do. No more, no less. When something's wrong, they tell you. People are harder to read. But they leave traces, same as a faulty wire. Heat in the wrong place, a flicker at the wrong time. Something that should be simple, suddenly requiring more explanation than it should. I'm not telling you this story so you'll be afraid. I'm telling you because fear and awareness are not the same thing. Fear keeps you inside. Awareness keeps you sharp. You don't have to be old to be a target. You don't have to be confused or alone or in decline. You just have to have something someone else wants, and someone in your life who has decided their need is larger than your right to your own name. Protect your accounts. Know who has access to your devices. Read the setup sheet before you follow it. And if someone in your life starts asking a lot of questions that all point in the same direction, toward your house, your money, your paperwork, your health, pay attention to the direction, not just the questions. Trust your instincts. Write things down. Don't be ashamed to ask a friend to sit beside you at a table when it matters. Your home is yours. Your name is yours. Your life is yours. Don't let anyone set up the wiring before you've read the plans. Thank you for listening to this. If it reminded you of something or someone, don't keep that to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. These situations survive in the dark and fall apart in the light. This is Voices of Uncle Walter. I'll see you in the next one.